The project was very near completion now, only really needing to be populated with rings, power-ups and badniks, but I'd had a thought about the section of wall blocking off the secret area. I would have liked to have made a wall which was animated in breaking away somehow, but I couldn't conceive a way of achieving this with which I would be happy. But what if I simply made it appear as though it was being broken through by hollowing out part of the wall and having debris breaking away from it? I'd first need to make a change to how I'd built the wall section, as it was currently attached to the wall section above it, but with the changes I was making it would make more sense to split part of the wall away and build it into the central facade section. The tunnel would need a backing to it to cover over the framework, so I bridged the left and right sides and created a hollowed out area between them. To give the appearance of the wall being smashed through, I added a couple of tiled plates to replicate chunks of wall breaking away, then finally a flat silver dish, which I guess was intended to represent Mechasonic, but admittedly I don't really know my characters, so feel free to suggest a more appropriate colour, preferably representing a character we don't yet have a minifigure for. The next session I wanted to finish some of the texturing designs I'd been adding to the facade. I had a pattern used on sections 3 and 4 which I'd had to modify to fit over the swing, but I was now wondering whether I could widen it out to match. I could move the whole pattern over to the right, but upon trying to widen it to the left I realised why I'd cut the pattern short in the first place. The facade may have been deep enough for the recess, but I obviously needed a backing plate for the tiles, for which I was currently using 2 large plates. If I could reduce this to a single large plate and find another way to strengthen it, then I should have space to move the slopes into, but after putting a plate in place I had another idea. Even though the edge of this plate wouldn't really be visible, I still wondered whether I could make it appear checkered by using a row of long, thin plates. The longest 1 stud wide dark orange plate is 6 modules, so only a single stud would connect to the rear plate strip, but I felt confident I could widen this to allow 2 studs to connect. After successfully converting the backing plates and widening the recessed pattern, I began counting out tiles on the left side of the swing, before realising I'd made an error with the right side pattern. I'd placed the inner and outer corner slopes too close to each other, but I was unable to position bricks any further left, and could only really move the pattern 1 module to the right, so I made the decision to shorten the pattern by 2 modules and change the others to match. With the design corrected, I counted out the tiles on the left side of the swing, finding that I had just enough space for the shorter pattern, but once I'd modified the segment of facade from over the swing, noticed I'd made exactly the same mistake as I had earlier. Thankfully this was a simple mistake which didn't require any design changes to fix. The reddish brown inner corner slope I'd been using for these patterns is unfortunately quite a rarity, and even though I'd managed to collect just over 30, I was still very limited in how much sculpting I could do, but as I'd found Go bricks to be of good quality for other parts, I decided to give them a go here too. Armed with more corner slopes, I thought I'd test the change to the shapes I'd been working on, introducing a notch to the top edge, but I felt it cut too deep for my Lego recreation, so I reverted it. Looking over screenshots from the game, there was still a much greater use of wall sculpting than my model. As I now had a couple of debossed patterns, I thought I'd try some embossing. I wasn't sure about modifying the wall below the moving columns, but there were a few good blank spaces available. Not feeling so confident about doing this, I backed up my save file and proceeded cautiously. I thought I'd try expanding the raised midsection into the area above, so I created a section that came up and stepped back down, but I spotted that this would seek corner slopes across the 2 sections, so I dropped the step into the lower section. Doing this, however, would mean lowering at least some of the neighbouring slopes and filling the void with tiles, but these would be stepped out just slightly from the tiles above. I really wasn't sure about mixing the square edges with sloped edges here, even though there were squared edges in other areas of the build. Unfortunately, I was unable to push back the tiles in line with those above, as this would have embedded the tiles in the supporting framework. In the end, I raised the design up and reset the slopes where they started, which I was happy enough with the look of. The second location I picked was by the log bridge, which I'd been unable to cut a shape into due to the drive shaft turning the bridge, but I could extend it out. I accidentally spaced the lower corner slopes too wide, but went with it to break up the brown patches they create. I dreamed up another new Lego element here, an inner corner slope but with cutouts I could place tiles on to maintain the checkered pattern. If an embossed shape could work by the log bridge, then it should also work in front of the moving columns, so this was my next choice. I went for a slightly off-centre step design, but felt this kind of blended into the patterns below it, so I tried a simpler straight-edged shape, but this didn't really work either. Next I tried an overhanging shape, which looked okay, but I felt I really needed more separation between the corner slopes of the different shapes, so I cut the bottom edge out and separated it entirely from the midsection. By the end of this session I'd added another 3 points of sculpting, with room to add a few more, though I don't want to go overboard. The next session was spent modifying parts of the facade with their new designs, before I got thinking about Badniks and where I could place them. As big as the project is, there actually aren't a lot of grassy areas I can place Badniks, and the width of the motobug created more restrictions on placement. I settled on a few locations for crab meat and motobug, but there was one other Green Hill Zone Badnik I was keen to add, the Buzz Bomber. The LEGO group has included its own take on the Buzz Bomber in the first wave of Sonic sets, but I feel it looks a little two-dimensional and doesn't match the ideas Badniks so well, so I decided to design my own. Finding high-resolution images of old video games often isn't possible, but Studio did a reasonable job of blowing up a screenshot to work from. I started with searching for inspiration from other MOC builders, and there were some good designs, though generally they were too small or too large. From the outset I wanted the abdomen to rotate around the thorax, so I began searching for elements to which I could attach a clip or a ball joint, anything that would allow the movement. There was the modified brick with 2 bars, but this would possibly be difficult to build a centralised thorax around. I felt 2x2 dishes were a good size and shape, and I could potentially join them with a rigid hose cut down to size, but I wasn't sure whether I could connect megaphones to the same holes as thrusters. They look fine being added on with plates with clips though. There wasn't really a way to add a head or wings to this design, so I went looking for other elements. Handcuffs could support a head and abdomen, but I didn't see a way to fix them to the dishes. I had a Technic connector in mind, but when I found it, the clips were in the wrong orientation to really be useful. Unless I could add the handcuffs to them. I thought my prayers had been answered when I found the tire iron, only to find that it was really too long to add connectors for other body parts. But then I found the droid body. This had bars to connect the dishes to, a bar to connect the abdomen to, and a bar and stud I could potentially add the head and wings to. Connecting the head with a modified plate didn't work on my first attempt, but I found success by rotating the droid body back. Things fell apart when I tried to add antennae though, as the head's central connection point was covered over. It didn't look so bad slightly below centre, but you know how I am with these things by now. Needing a wing on each side, I went for the 1x1 plate with 2 bars, but I had to seat it too far off the thorax to prevent it colliding. Looking through the list of elements, I found that a boomerang could have been perfect for the wings, if only it was 3 times bigger. I thought I'd try turning the droid body over and connecting the wings to the bar and the head to the stud, but watching the second bar rotating in the mechanical claw got me questioning whether it actually fitted, so I grabbed what parts I had available to test it. The first problem I found was the dome top brick did not have a hollow stud for the bar of the claw. I could insert it into the longer base, but the abdomen wouldn't look right in this orientation. Secondly, the claw did not rotate around the bar on the droid body, but a regular clip did, so I was able to replace it with a tile with a clip on top. The third issue was the droid's arm bars weren't quite long enough to fix into the back of a dish, though weirdly they did fix into the back of a round plate with hollow stud, so I could fix the dishes on, albeit at a wider distance. With the thrusters on its sides, it was looking a little wide, though actually not much wider than the motobug, but I was questioning whether something other than the dishes might work better. I went for the 2x2 round tile with stud, but as with the dishes, found the arm bars didn't reach the hollow centre, but rather than adding 1x1 plates again, I questioned whether it would look acceptable inverted. Inverted dishes would have their curve facing in the wrong way, but this would largely be flat facing either way. The megaphones even fitted better this way, as the bar slotted in the tile stud cut out, The final puzzle was the wings. I'd tried a few different elements with no joy, but looking at Lego's Buzz Bomber again, I wondered whether they'd actually had the right idea with their bulky brick-built wings, if I could only find a way to attach them. I tried offsetting the wings on a 1x2 plate, but while I felt the wings did look appropriate, the plate sticking up out of the thorax did not. I placed the cheese slope on the droid body stud and dreamed up another new element here. The cheese slope with stud. Inverting the body and using a plate with a clip to attach the wings somehow looked better than the plate stacked on the stud, but this way I'd have to attach the head to an awkwardly angled stud. The posing bar was around the right angle for this, but it just looked terrible as the neck. Looking through elements again, I spotted the tile with vertical bar, and realised I could invert the wing's central plate to connect to one. The design was finally coming together, but there was one tiny flaw on the horizon threatening to spoil my hard work.